Hello and welcome back to our Beatles chat, our Beatles Get Back after show, I guess we could call it.
Mini-series. It's a mini-series.
Basically, if you haven't seen part one is available. It's some preamble, some predictions in part one, and then a seamless transition into our thoughts about episode 1 of Get Back. At the end of episode 1, we were left with a cliffhanger, weren't we?
Yeah, we were left on that cliffhanger. So basically, George leaves the group, and then they go and have that meeting at Ringo's with his lovely big house, and then it just goes, the meeting does not go well. And then we had to wait, whatever it was, 24 hours to see the next part, which was just agonising.
It was,
to be honest.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep going with
I
it,
get
really.
why they didn't put all 3 parts out on one day.
Yeah, because it's a lot to digest.
But I would have done. I would, in a single sitting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other Beatles-inclined people in our life would do the same if they had, the time off work and could do so,
Yeah.
So the big cliffhanger was George leaving. I mean, obviously, the spoiler is in the fact that the Let It Be album did come out, and also Abbey Road. So it's not like there's a complete element of mystery.
No.
But I certainly don't know how they get him to come back. Like it's the same. There's the story of Ringo leaving the band for a bit, and he sort of comes back. I don't really know what went down in order to make that happen.
So do you think we're going to find this out in part 2?
I hope so, or maybe it's just one of those things that just happened at one of their houses, and it's kind of something they're going to have to kind of read in between the lines a bit.
It might be told via, if they exist, it might be told. A lot of this story narrative, if there is a narrative, I guess there is. It's just. It's not spoon-fed to you. You just pick up the pieces as you go along.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's it's through little hot mic moments, isn't it? And like people talking over a cup of tea in the corner.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get the office gossip. What else do you think we're going to see in part 2?
Well, we've already heard Billy Preston referred to in conversation, not even as a potential person to play in the band at that point, but. In part 1, I think George is saying that he saw him playing on the telly or at some festival, and how, these days.
Oh, he was with Little Richard when they were in Hamburg.
Oh, that was it. So he was with Little Richard in Hamburg, and then George had seen him again playing with Ray Charles, either in person or on the TV.
That's right.
And Billy had ended up taking on a lot of those parts, but at that point they weren't talking about getting him into the band. They were just. They'd heard of his keyboard skills, basically, and had a bit of a relationship. So I'm sure we'll see him end up in the playing with them. He's definitely there by the rooftop, so he's got to show up at some point, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He's on the album, isn't he?
Yeah,
and he's at the rooftop show.
Yeah,
so it's inevitable.
So it's either part 2 or 3.
It's quite interesting seeing something play out where the major beats of the story already.
Yeah.
I've not experienced this I don't know, maybe like you see films, don't you, when they do they sort of in historical films when what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how they get there. And there's that tension of, when is so-and-so going to come in?
The Nazis get defeated in the end.
Right.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It's like the major beats, although those bits, there's still so much intrigue in but when they're in a sort of particularly dark bit,
that they come out of it,
and that almost makes it more interesting because you're like, well, how are they going to recover this?
Right?
I mean, presumably when they leave Twickenham, and they're not in that massive air hangar and sat on uncomfortable chairs and stuff. That will get the juices flowing a bit more, but this certainly doesn't look like a group that's ready to deliver an album or a gig, anything really.
Nothing.
It's just so loose.
Yeah, I mean, most of them can't even show up at the same time.
They can't show up on time. They can't go more than about a whole verse without one of them doing a ridiculous ad lib, and then it just descends into them doing voices.
Yeah.
There's a lot of. I mean, Paul's got a lot of voices he likes to crack out, hasn't he?
Yes, he does.
And then John will start shouting, and then before you know it, there's just Ringo's just sat at the back, just I just want to play the drums, and he just looks sad because he's happiest when he's drumming, but there's nothing for him to drum on yet, really, is there?
Right. So there we go. So I reckon that sums up what we thought of part 1 and what we think about what we think will be in part 2.
Yeah, bit of Billy Preston, hopefully. George coming back somehow.
Somehow. A studio change.
A studio change.
Well, that'd be interesting to see how that's set up again and what's in that.
Yeah. Some more great coats.
Some more great coats. Some more gossip.
More gossip.
Maybe some more passive-aggressive.
Oh, I hope so. I like those bits.
And certainly more Yoko.
Yeah. I will reserve my comment on that. I think that her contributions to the various Beatles jams over the years speak for themselves. Wowie. 2.5 hours have passed. We've not moved from our spot.
It's not. It's 3, isn't it? It's
nearly,
almost 3.
Nearly 3 this one.
2 hours 50 something this one.
Yeah,
I
that's
think.
true, actually. I mean, it just comes over in such a wash and it still feels short, I have to say.
Yeah.
But I did actually have to start taking notes for this because this one was sort of coming so thick and fast
Yeah.
that there was a few things that I just thought if I don't make a note of that, I'm going to forget it. But I mean, what's your overall impression of this episode?
Straight off the bat, much more harmony. And I don't mean it, well, I mean, possibly in a musical sense as well, but definitely in terms of group dynamic and relationships, more harmony in this episode than in the last one.
Yeah, everyone's getting on a lot better, aren't they? And like that, I feel like that they do, you know, they changed over to Apple and it's a much more, you know, living room vibe, like it's sort of their little messy castle, isn't it? But it doesn't, it's you know, it's a London townhouse, not some massive shed. So it just feels, yeah, a bit more like a sort of normal working environment rather than a weird workaround.
Yeah, and you can tell that although that meeting that we discussed beforehand with George,
Yeah,
we said we weren't sure how that narrative was going to play out, how that news would be delivered to us that they'd had a conversation, he was back in the band. That's the one where they said that cameras weren't allowed in, is that right?
yeah. So I think there was. I think if I remember, on the end of part 1, they were talking about the meeting at Ringo's house on the Sunday,
which did not go well.
And then at the beginning of part 2, they're talking about how George has gone back up to Liverpool. And then I think they get him on like the Monday or something after he's back. Again, that's at his house.
Right.
And then I believe the following day, possibly, that is that's the first day at Apple. But yeah, no cameras are allowed in. So we see at that point the Beatles entering the building. We see those Apple scruffs there as well, actually, which is quite a cool little thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to digress too much, so I should pop a pin in what I was just saying. But that bit where the Apple scruffs are being asked about what they think about Yoko, and you'd expect of anyone, you know, these rabid super fans to kind of like be slinging mud at her. But one of them goes like, well, I don't think it's anyone else's business except them's, really. And it's just like, and then the director just goes, or whoever's filming just goes like, yeah, that's a rather good answer, yes.
Yes, you're right.
They
both look like Yoko.
They do. They both sort of, yeah, they
interesting.
sort of styled herself. I mean, maybe that's just the sort of
Maybe that's the
the
look of the day.
60s fashion, that sort of, yeah. But yeah, we see all the Beatles arriving at Apple, but I don't think there's any filming in the building that day. And then the next day, it's kind of almost as if nothing's happened. We see each of them arrive. Like we see Paul come in and throw his
That's
coat.
a cool segment of them arriving.
Great
It's
car,
kind
amazing.
of like a montage.
Yeah, little
of each
montages
coming in.
and then the suits getting there and that, isn't it?
Yeah,
And they've all got really nice cars.
yeah. I mean, they're men that have taste, aren't they? At this point, they've got money, and that. But because you have money, doesn't mean you have taste.
Yeah.
These all have taste. They all know what a great car is. They pick a nice looking house.
Yeah.
Their clothes are great. They just know what's going on. They know what's up.
Yeah, they certainly did have like more extravagant purchases they made. Like sort of John Lennon had that Rolls Royce that was all psychedelic and that, wasn't it? Which is kind of cool, but I wouldn't describe it as classy necessarily. But yeah, I think George shows up in like a white Mercedes or something.
Yeah,
it looks like the sort of car you'd see like a Cuban dictator driving around in. But yeah, they all just look so cool. And he's wearing that like massive black hat and
Yeah.
kind of looking like the Grim Reaper. And it's like, yeah, he's back. And as soon as they're kind of all in the studio, it kind of seems like they had the blowout. George fucked off up to Liverpool for the weekend. And then they just sort of sorted it out and got on with it.
Yeah, it kind of feels like they hit the reset button and the air was cleared. And quite obviously, George had some demands or stipulations that he wanted. And one of those would have probably been, let's get the fuck out of Twickenham.
Yeah. I mean, actually, that's the point. I mean, before they did leave Twickenham, we shouldn't gloss over the part of the episode that's the sort of unproductive bits at Twickenham where George isn't there.
Yeah.
And like one bit that particularly struck me was when they're all sort of sat around. I think it's just Ringo and Paul, because John hasn't arrived yet. And
that's right.
Running late. And,
I think I know where you're going. Yeah.
And Paul goes like, and then there were two, which really struck me, because obviously they're the only two surviving ones now. And like they both look really sad. But also he's just sort of doing his McCartney thing and having a bold idea, talking about like, doing their news bulletin. He's like, we got news from all over the world and then we actually see the pictures from where it is. And he's just sort of, going off being Paul.
He says, we get the best news readers.
The best newsmen.
Yeah. From all over the world. Yeah. And then apparently he was saying that there's a song between each thing and then some news or something. So they play between each news bulletin.
And then he was saying the final bulletin is the Beatles have broken up. And it's like, you see like almost like a little shock because I think it's almost the first time anyone has kind of fully said out loud that the complete dissolution of the band is very much on the cards at that point.
Yes.
And like they both just look like Ringo literally like, staring up at the ceiling. There's a really sad few days.
Yeah.
And then
that is interesting because when he says that, you can tell that even he's like, once he's verbalized it, even he's like, oh, a little bit from it. Kind of like he's put, because you think, oh, he's being a little bit, not facetious, but he's just being a little bit proddy.
Yeah.
And a little bit like defeatist maybe, or just trying to, it's weird how they communicate, isn't it? Because again, he's delivered something really important and quite destructive or damning.
Yeah.
Wrapped up in a little bow, isn't it?
It's just at the tail end of a classic McCartney flight of fancy.
Yeah.
And then just this bomb hits you.
And you can almost feel just all the oxygen leave the room.
Yeah.
You're not there, you're not in the vibe, but at this point, the way this documentary is cut and put together, you're just immersed in it and you're just sort of there, aren't you?
Yeah.
And when he says it, he just kind of like, people kind of squirm a little bit. Like, it's just not, it's not a good moment.
Oh, don't do that. But also that probably might happen at this point. But then, there's that pretty miserable few days. But then when they get to Apple, and there's that bit where they keep reading. They return to this a few times actually, where one of them will be reading an article about the Beatles in a silly voice. And I think on that first day there, John is reading that like, George Harrison was caught of assaulting a photographer outside a nightclub, blah, blah, blah. And like, it's immediately they're just larking around again. And there's that bit where Paul is reading that one about how like, it's only due to their finances that they haven't broken up. And he's saying like, they all lead entirely separate lives and all this. And they're all four of them sat around reading this, laughing at it. And it's just like any attempt for an outside source to try and kind of encapsulate them, they're just like, no, you got that wrong, haven't you? And
it is interesting though, because they are the four of the most famous people on the planet at that point.
Yeah.
And they're all famous in their own right. They're all famous because they're Beatles, but they're all famous in their own right because, like we were talking about in the last episode, they've all got their little caricature bits.
Yeah, definitely.
That was part of the marketing, wasn't it? So it's interesting. It must be strange for them because they come in and they go to work and they sit down, and there they are in the national newspapers, and they just read out loud about each other. It's a weird office to be in, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's not
normal
it's
at
not
all,
normal.
is it?
It's not a normal
And it's
existence.
almost like them sort of, they're like mocking it, all kind of, reading it in silly voices and laughing along and that. But it must also at the same time be weird to just have this other version of you that exists in people's minds whereas you're just there, consuming what we've seen is a tremendous amount of tea and toast.
Loads.
Just going about your life, and it must be very odd trying to reconcile your sort of press character with who you feel you are.
Yes.
And I guess the four of them are the only ones who understand what it's like, because they knew each other before and they know in which ways they are misrepresented.
Yeah.
So they can apply that to the others. And it's almost like they're back in Apple and just like bonding over how no one gets them. And I think it's actually quite a nice moment, really.
It's sort of like, they're almost like, they're at a point in history where the only people who have that kind of experience with the press that often are politicians.
Politicians and royalty.
Royalty, Elvis Presley.
Yeah. And even America's just not the same, really, is it? Like, it's so big that, like, you can sort of still find anonymity. Whereas, in the UK, we're all kind of on top of each other a bit, aren't we?
Yeah, a little bit. So it's kind of odd that they're experiencing this very strange fame.
Yeah, and they were the first and kind of the last as well to have it in that way.
Magnitude.
And just the extent to which it wasn't just the intensity, it was the duration as well, wasn't it? Like,
some people are that famous for 6 months.
I mean, both me and you were born in the bloody 90s, yet here we are talking about them. And here we are in 2021, and there's a film coming out over them, and I appreciate we move in Beatles circles, so we're obviously very excited, and it feels like it's a massive thing. But I think it is a big thing.
It is a big thing,
and the fact that they're still doing it, they're still making it, and there's demand for it. It really is amazing, and I don't think there's ever going to be another act that captures lightning in a bottle in quite the same way, because it's been, as George Harrison says in the Simpsons episode that he appears in, it's been done. They did it. Yeah. They've done it already. So what else is there for another band to come and do afterwards?
Yeah. And you're right. And if it isn't a big moment for music in general, or if there's no interest in it for its content, it's a big landmark moment technologically. It's a big TV moment.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to be seeing... you see trickle down effects of all this stuff, like doing digital extraction 15 years ago of instruments would be a crazy idea, and it would have cost millions. And now, I can do it in a pack of software that costs 200 quid, So eventually this sort of stuff is going to start filtering down to normal people, and other filmmakers, and to see what could be done with it. Who knows what other stories, forget the Beatles, forget music, anything in the world, how much dusty footage that's a bit naff do you think with a bit of TLC could actually be reused to tell a really interesting story?
Yeah. We could be looking at a whole new, not a genre, but possibly a subgenre or a new style of documentary. And yet again, Beatles at the helm of it. I know there was World War I footage that Peter Jackson had previously worked on. Yeah. But to this magnitude, and to couple that digital extraction with it as well. Yeah. That whole package. It's just like it's another first for the Beatles. Yeah. And it's 50 years on.
50 years on.
And they're still on the spear, the tip of the spear for technology and entertainment and the way it's consumed and how it's brought to you.
It's mad. We've got lovely and poetic about the Beatles there. Yeah. I'm going to bring us back down to earth to the Beatles Get Back Part 2. But no, I love it. Yeah. But
let's look at your notes.
Let's get back into my notes. I have written, seeing them receive different bits of gear.
Doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but to guys like us, it's kind of like, what is that?
But it's also, I mean, even if so, it's I've written down. We see them get the Fender Rhodes, the Leslie, the lap steel. It is a lap steel. And then that Magic Alex instrument, which is a guitar on one side of the fretboard and a bass on the other, and it's got no tuning pegs. But you're just seeing these things get bought in, and they're just kind of excited by them and tinkering around with them, and just sort of excited to get the new sound. But I mean, seeing George Harrison take delivery of his Leslie, like that kind of became his sound almost from later on, didn't it? that sort of soaring Leslie warbly guitar thing. It's certainly all over the Let It Be album.
So that it's the birth of it. So it's the birth of a coupling, a famous marriage of things there.
Yeah,
and
like,
he's sort of humbly bringing it in himself.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of gravity to that shot,
because that's all over his solo stuff as well.
And
you know?
no one knows it in the moment, not even him.
No, exactly.
It's
but
very
we
powerful.
know, and we see them get this Fender Rhodes, and we see them sort of poking around with it and be, they're just sort of having fun with this like brand new bit of kit, and we know that the electric piano solo in Get Back, it's just pure filth, mate. And those keys will soon be spitting that out.
Yeah.
But they don't know it yet.
They don't know
it. And it's just that
it's like fan service in a film.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's actually it's from
real
the
life.
Yeah, it's like that would have been like him bringing in that Leslie would have been a little Easter egg in the back of a Beatles biopic.
Yeah.
We're watching the real
the video for Free as a Bird, wouldn't it? Because that's got loads of Easter eggs, hasn't it?
Yeah, it'd be that sort of thing, but we're actually seeing the real thing.
Yeah,
it's remarkable.
And I particularly love that thing. So when they get that, I want to be careful here because there's a pedal steel, slide guitar, and lap steel are all different things, and those in that world get very upset if you mix up the two. So it's a lap steel,
right?
That kind of strange short guitar thing that they've got the slide for.
Yeah.
And I mean that just sort of became like George Harrison and slide guitar just kind of go together. You know, that lap steel thing's all over All Things Must Pass, isn't it? And like that's another kind of really important part of him finding his sound. And then when John is playing it on For You Blue, which again, that's in my notes. For You Blue absolutely slaps.
Yeah.
They're just dicking around all day, barely getting anything done. And then Paul's on the piano playing a bass line. Ringo's on the drums. John is playing the lap steel now. And George is singing and playing that Gibson J2000 acoustic. And like, it just comes together so well. And like, I mean, everything else has been like kind of sloppy a bit, and like, but you know, with that, it's just
had a pocket.
Perfect pocket, the perfect tempo. It doesn't deviate at all, and like just there's no bass guitar on it. It's kind of quite a strange instrumentation: acoustic guitar, lap steel, piano, and drums.
It's quite sparse and quite curious sounding, isn't it? It's quite lots of little curious.
It's sliding all over the place.
Like it's just fantastic.
And it's just so cool. Like literally, you see them get the lap steel, and like they give it to George, and I think John goes like, "Oh well, we've only bought him a cheap one, and if he gets any good, we'll buy him a better one." And then we know that he sort of became the slide guy.
Slide guy, and I'm wondering if that is off the back of him, because he does come to the realization in this documentary that as a lead guitarist, he's not much cop.
Yeah, well, I think what he's
maybe the workaround where he could be that expressive lead instrument without having to.
I mean, the guitar having frets, it sort of limits how fluid you can be, and obviously, as he says himself, people like Eric can play very fluidly. He's like, he can just keep it on going. I can't really do that. Whereas if you're using a slide and you've got some nice reverb and delay on it, you can just bend all over the place and you can really sing a lot more. And it's like, I feel like, whenever George Harrison sings, it's all in the little inflections, isn't it? It's very kind of slidey, like Within You, Without You. It's like all these almost microtonal slides and stuff, and
very melodic, isn't he?
Very melodic, very expressive, and in some ways the guitar being a fretted 6-string instrument kind of limits what you can do on that, whereas a slide to me seems much more like you can kind of paint with it. I've gone very wanky there, but I think I know
I know exactly what you mean. It just there's a complete freedom.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. What else was interesting? Oh, Billy Preston coming in.
He does indeed show up.
And when he sits with them, and they're kind of having a conversation that we know is leading up to them going, so why don't you give it a shot with us?
Yeah.
He knows that they're talking about needing a piano player or a keys player or an organ player, however they put it. And he understands that he's been summoned to the studio, so he's not there to be asked for any recommendations of people he knows. So there's a little look
Yeah.
in his eye when he's kind of getting the idea, oh, I think they're going to ask me, but he's got to play it cool.
That's it. Yeah, I think you may have misremembered that slightly.
Okay.
So I think what it was, because my initial impression before we'd seen it was I thought that George had said, like, I'll come back if we get Billy in. But that isn't the case.
Right.
So there was a little on-screen text when he shows up at first in his leather jacket that just said he was in London for some gigs and swung by the studio. But then the bit you're talking about is when he's talking to John, and it becomes clear John's about to ask him to play on the
he was
record.
talking to Paul.
No, I don't think so. No.
There's a moment where he's jamming with Paul.
And there's a bit where Paul
very elated by it, very excited.
They're loving it, yeah. But there's that very first bit where he's just.
No, it is John. You're right. And
he's talking to John,
casual about it.
Because I always thought it was George who had Billy. So that's a Let It Be anthology myth busted there. It was John who asked him to join.
Right.
But then I think there's a bit with Paul where I think they're playing Get Back, and then they do Don't Let Me Down. Obviously they both just come together completely and they just fall in.
Yeah.
And I think at one point Paul goes over to Billy and he goes like he's like, just so you know, you are getting paid for this. And Billy's like, oh, it's fine, I just don't want to talk money. And he's like, I know, but you've been showing up every day. I just want you to know you are getting paid. Like, and it's just sort of quite, I don't know, it's quite an interesting moment. I mean, I'm jumping around chronologically a bit now, but
what is great is that as the days progress and he gets more and more comfortable,
he starts looking more like a damn Beatle.
Yeah, well, starts just dressing more like a rock star.
Yeah,
you know, like or a rock star for a day or whatever. He looks dapper.
That mustard suit is incredible, and I mean, forget Paul and all the guys in the band actually look happy once he's there, and they seem to be just really having fun, and they're grooving off like a different kind of energy.
Yeah.
But Billy himself cannot keep the fucking smile off his face, can he? He is just he just always looks like he's like won a competition. He's like, that's the Beatles and I'm playing. He's like,
He's won the lottery. Won the lottery.
But also, I mean, he's won the lottery. I mean, it's being in the right place at the right time, but also his playing is incredible.
Exquisite.
And to be able to keep a cool head when you've just been asked to join the Beatles. I mean, yeah, he cracks a bit of a smile, but you know, that is
smiles are allowed.
Of course, you're going to smile. You know, and it's he really steps up to the plate in terms of his playing. He doesn't overplay, but it's none of them would ever do anything like that if they put them in front.
Yeah,
of the
he brings he's because they're. I mean, I wouldn't like to call Paul or John intermediate piano players.
No, but they're self-taught, aren't
they're
they?
Self-taught, and they're
vibe guys.
Yeah,
you know?
and they know enough to write a song and make it interesting without it just being chords.
Yeah.
But he brings in a more virtuosic strand.
They can both, I think, both John and Paul. You don't really see much George keyboard action, but I think he must do a bit.
I'm sure
here
he could
and
have
there.
done some.
Both of them can vamp chords on pretty much any keyboard instrument quite well. So, you know, they're not just going pling, pling. You know, they can do it. They can, you know, get a little groove going, a pling, 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 whatever suits the song.
Yeah.
But Billy's got licks.
Yeah.
Billy's got licks. He's got riffs. He's got feel, and like.
Well, that's his first. You know, I'm assuming that's his first instrument. Like that's what he does.
He's a keys guy. Yeah, definitely.
But what John and Paul do, they you know, they're split between various disciplines. Aren't
exactly.
They?
I mean, them. Yeah.
So he's been able to just be like, oh, this is what I do.
He's got his corner.
Yeah.
Safely locked down, hasn't he? And you can just trust him. And it's like you see. We didn't mention this in part one, but you see Get Back, the song, literally being plucked out of thin air by Paul. He's just sat on bass, and then before you know it, Get Back is emerging from the ether. And we kind of see this getting built upon, and like Ringo hasn't found his beat, and they haven't found those stabs yet, you know, the boom, boom. I'm pretty sure once Billy's there, they just sort of turn up, and then the stabs are just sort of, it becomes a record. It stops being a jam and becomes a record at that point.
Yeah. It's there's so much history just unfolding
Yeah.
before your eyes, in so many mythological beasts being born,
Yeah.
that it's almost overwhelming.
It's
hard to intellectualize what you see
it's
sometimes.
so hard to take in. And like while we're talking, every 5 seconds, my brain goes, "Oh, here's another bit. Talk about that. And it's like, I've just realised that we haven't even mentioned the flower pot sequence yet.
That was amazing. That was when it was like, okay, this is really getting interesting. Is like their world is weird.
A very weird. The fact that
'cause
was a
they were
gonzo
weird.
recording.
Yeah, because they were weird, because the environment was kind of weird. But that was, and they also had issues, I guess, they had to iron out. But when they cut to that vase on the table and it says that there was a hidden microphone in the vase, it felt very sinister, didn't it?
It did. I know what you mean.
Like
I know
Truman
what you mean.
Show.
It's a little bit, that they can't, they don't have the option for privacy, but here we are listening to it. But at the same time, I'm so glad they did, because it was so interesting to hear them being just so candid. And like John, they were kind of, there was a few themes that kept coming up, but they were like, John, I felt, was really fighting George's corner, being like, oh, the other day we should have backed him up and we didn't. And various little nuggets that come out. I think they're both saying how they're just finding it really hard to lead the ship since Brian's died, and kind of neither of them want to do it, but Paul has to, and Paul wants backup from John, but John wants to back up George. But it's just such like a, you realise what a horrible kind of mess they're in that the Beatles train just has not stopped since it started.
Yeah.
And Brian Epstein dying, they kind of, you can power off on kind of grief for a little bit. They're almost in the kind of like, I can't even find the words to describe what sort of phase they're in.
Yeah.
But it's just a sort of like, what the hell do we do now? And I feel that's them being so honest and really understanding the situation they're in. But they're just like, we don't know either.
Yeah.
I don't know. And as well, like, the way they'd edited that with just some sort of stock footage in a 60s style canteen of a flower vase. Again, I just thought it was so powerful with the blue text on that side of the screen and the green on the other, and it all being subtitled. I don't know, that sequence just really hit.
Right. Yeah, because they didn't need to, because they could have just got a loop of them sat around with the coffee machine or whatever, and sort of like we've seen before, where that it's not, you're seeing something and you're hearing something different.
Well, you go, they've slowed that shot down quite a lot. Yeah.
But it was a good decision to remain trained on that flower pot.
I think so, and it's really interesting because it's almost the first artificial thing we've seen in the whole documentary up to that point, isn't it? Everything is so gonzo and candid, and now all of a sudden we have this quite beautifully shot, swoopy vase stuff over an old secret recording. Yeah,
and all of the chairs are empty as well, and it kind of just gives it this sort of like, it's you're hearing an echo of the past, aren't you?
It's like in a game where you've got to find a load of cassettes through the world that tell the story of how the dystopia came to be.
Yes.
Some other notes I've made. Glyn Johns is so essential. That's all I've written for that. But I think I know what I mean, in that he's the daddy, isn't he? He's keeping them on track. I mean, he's coming up with brilliant little arrangement nuggets here and there. The sound that they're getting in Apple is incredible. And yeah, I just think he was so... I think up until that point, in most accounts, he'd been kind of portrayed as a bit of a hanger-on, maybe.
Right.
Whereas he's so instrumental to what's happening, isn't he?
And he's not kissing any ass.
No.
He's not that typical hanger-on where...
He's telling them, no, don't do that. Do it like this. Yeah.
He's pretty cool. And they seem to respect what he has to say. And he's not interjecting.
No.
All the time. He's not trying to take a spot as the producer or whatever. He's not stepping on George Martin's toes, really. He's I don't know if it's an executive producer. I don't
Well,
know what
I
the
think-
role would be.
I don't know. Well, so on Let It Be, the final one that did come out, he's not credited as a producer. But I believe at the time the idea was that George Martin and Glyn Johns were co-producing the sessions, and there's a few times we actually see them interacting. There's a bit where I think they're listening back to For You Blue, having nailed it, and they're all going, "Oh, the sound's great to hear in Apple," and George goes, "Oh yes, it's all Apple, nothing to do with Paul Glynn here," or something, doesn't he? And so George is giving him his credit, but yeah, they don't seem to be locking horns or anything. They seem to be really nicely working around each other.
Yeah. It's like you said, essential. And every time he opens his mouth, it's sort of helpful.
Yeah. So I think
he's great.
He's been much maligned, maybe, and kind of his contributions a little bit. So I don't know. Maybe, maybe in part 3, we're going to see John and Glyn start to piss each other off a bit, and maybe he says the wrong thing, and John goes, "Well, I don't want you as a producer then," and he locks his credit off. But certainly from what I've seen so far, and what I know the role of a producer to be, he is producing that album.
Yeah.
With George Martin, but equally,
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's odd watching him knowing that again,
he's going to
you
get
know the
done
history.
dirty.
Yeah.
And I also know that the mixes he ended up with were lackluster, so I can't make sense of all this.
Right. Yeah, they knocked him off the producer's credit because
maybe they just
like
hated
his
the
mixes.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that unfolds.
Perhaps the argument comes out after the mixes.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We'll see.
Who
Right.
knows?
Was there anything else that I put that we need to mention?
Yeah, where does part 2
where does part 2 end?
Where are we left? Because there is more to talk about from part 2.
There definitely is. I mean,
they conceptualize that Get Back needs to be a single.
Oh, they do, don't they?
In the control room.
Yeah,
and then it feels like they listen to it once and not even the whole way through, and they go, "Oh,
Yeah,
that's
put it
great.
out."
That is, yeah. We should put this out next week."
I know it's amazing, isn't it? They're like, George is like, "We'll have the master cut overnight. It'll be in the shops on Monday." He's really got his eye on the finances, hasn't
Right.
he?
But there's no talk of like, "Oh no, we'd have to do a 3-week press campaign for this," or you know what I mean?
It's
Or
like just
how are we
whack it
going
out.
to put the sleeves together? Or
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? All this sort of stuff. And oh wow, this is the wrong time to release a single. If we wait a month, we get the Christmas rush or so. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
We're in the wrong quarter for that, John. There's nothing like that. It's just like, yeah, we put it out next week.
Just whack it out. It's good. I think they're just like, we haven't done one for 6 months. We got to put something out.
And maybe they feel like it could just show up in the shops and it would sell.
I mean, it
You
would,
wouldn't even
wouldn't
have to announce it. You just go to the record store and word would get out. There's a new Beatles single. But also perhaps they don't say it to themselves because they've got too much pride. But perhaps they need a win.
Yeah, they just
Perhaps
need a
after
little.
all of that.
They just sort of need a good little straightforward song without no sitars on it, no weird drug stuff, just a great little rocker.
Yeah, but perhaps they need to put something out there and just be reminded that, people care. They're still waiting for this music. Like they want it. We're relevant still. Because they obviously, like you were saying, Epstein died. And
started the rudderless period.
Yeah, and they felt a little bit out of sorts and maybe like they were free falling slightly.
Speaking of which, isn't it interesting to see them looking back at themselves in India, which at that point was still relatively recent, and they can't see themselves in themselves a year on.
Yeah, it's almost like when, if I were to watch an interview of myself when I was 20 or something, I'd be like, who is that?
If in 10 years' time you watch the first season of The Giant Pod.
Yeah. It will be like, that is me, but it's not me. It's very strange. But it's interesting because Paul is very, he's very honest in that, isn't he, with John?
Yeah.
And essentially says to John, not very genuine, was that?
You were faking it a bit, yeah.
Yeah. But I think he's also, I think George is probably the only one that kind of held on to any of that
Yeah, I think he probably
That was
was.
stuff with the Hare Krishna stuff. Well,
There-
he says to John, he says, "It wasn't very you, was it?" Something like that.
This does get back though to the Brian Epstein thing, in that I'm pretty sure when they first met that Maharishi guy while he was in Wales, that was the day Brian Epstein died. So they were probably just lost at that point. So just doubled down on this Indian stuff. And then the smoke clears a year later and they realise it wasn't necessarily sincere and might have been a bit of a reactionary thing.
Yeah, interesting because he was their leader.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this guy comes along.
I mean, they call him Mr. Epstein. I think it's so sad, isn't it? Even after he's dead, they're like, we miss Mr. Epstein.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That he never became Brian to them, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sure they could call him Brian as well, but it's just sort of almost like acknowledging him as the grown-up in the room, isn't it? Like,
well, perhaps, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure what it was like in '69, but perhaps that was the done
thing. Could
when
be.
someone's passed, is to address them as I don't know, but that is an interesting. It reveals something, doesn't it, in terms of mentality or how close
that they were just at a sort of that point. You know, they would go for. They were searching for anything. It's not to say that there's nothing in mysticism and all that, but for all four of them to kind of. Well, Ringo, I'd say, dived in the least, didn't he? But let's just say, for the point of this, all four of them fully, went headfirst into all that. That seems to me, again, like a grief response.
Possibly, yeah.
So,
and this Maharishi guy, he's a leadership character.
Yeah,
you can call him what you like. Call him a charlatan or sycophant, whatever.
I honestly can't decide. I mean,
I don't know.
In Craig Brown's book. I think it's called 1, 2, 3, 4. The Beatles song, I can't remember the title, but he's like the Maharishi was probably a real spiritual guy, but also a lot of his spiritual wishes were like Beatles. The Lord has told me you must purchase me a Rolls Royce. you know,
right? He's not hiding much there, is he?
Yeah. So it's a bit. Yeah, it's an odd period in general, that whole Maharishi White Album time,
Yeah.
There's something weirdly sinister and macabre to kind of all of it.
But luckily they sort of come out the other end of it. But there's no overtly Indian inspired or Eastern inspired licks and whatnot on Let It Be, is there? I don't think.
No, I don't even think George Harrison brings any odd instruments in. The slide guitar, the lap steel and the Leslie are their new toys, and the Rhodes, aren't they? That's sort of keeping them occupied.
What's next?
Oh,
the best bit. The funniest, the best moment is when they decide, why don't we try the roof? And they go up to the roof.
Oh, yes! No, sorry, you tell it.
They're jumping up on the roof and they're all helping each other up. And then the shot, it's so Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
It's
dragging Michael Lindsay Hogg up onto a ledge.
Both arms are out and they've got both, so they're just dragging him. And he's almost like, he's just kind of like flat, isn't he?
Yeah.
Like he's not floppy or anything.
And he's got a cigar hanging out his mouth.
He's like that. Cigar hanging out, and they're dragging him like a stiff board across the top of the roof.
Fun. That was one of a number of grave health and safety violations that were in part 2.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember that bit at the beginning when Paul, like, they're still in Twickenham at this point, he finds a chain into some rig somewhere, and then before you know it, Ringo is hoisting him up to the roof, and he's just hanging on, and it's like, we were saying that, and that shot of them just getting dragged on the ground is just, that must have been like them doing a sketch or something, or them like being like, oh, Michael, wouldn't it be funny if we dragged you? It's like, surely he's not that much of a Joffrey character that, like,
I don't know, but I mean, maybe he just wasn't nimble enough and he just needed the help.
Very odd. And I mean, Michael Lindsay Hogg, he seems to be getting in the way a bit more now, doesn't he? And
well, they're cottoning on.
He keeps trying to get them. They just like want to go up on the roof, and he's like, "But guys, what about the torch lit amphitheater. And it's like, yeah, I don't get me wrong. I wish we could see that too.
Yeah.
But read the room, Michael. Read the room.
Very funny. So yeah, we could probably talk about this for ages. So let's try and get to a wrap here.
Mhm.
There's that, as you would say, chilling subtitle that pops up when they're on the roof that says they're wondering whether the roof will manage to sustain the weight of the equipment and the band.
Yeah.
Which obviously they've said fuck it and tried it anyway.
Yeah. Again, it's the 1969 health and safety approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not really a big ending to this. I think they just sort of go to bed and then it's like there's only 4 days left of the concert.
That's
but they
right.
still haven't got.
I still haven't heard a whole album at this point.
No, but yeah, man. I mean, look, we could keep on opening cans of worms all night, but part 3 comes out pretty soon, so I feel we need to rest, cleanse our minds of the Beatles, and then come in for part 3.
I can't wait. Although I'm going to be a bit, when it's over,
listless.
oh.
Yeah, who knows? I like to think. I feel like the Beatles are looking after us at the minute. We've just had the lyrics from McCartney. We've just had this. You know, they're going to... Hopefully they'll announce a Revolver reissue or something.
That would be sick. Yeah, we've had the Let It Be Super Deluxe. We've had the Get Back film. Like you said, the lyrics book from McCartney. George Harrison, All Things Must Pass. 2021 mix or whichever
Did we
mix.
get a 50th of Imagine? We must have done. That was this year.
It must have happened.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. It's probably been reissued 10 times, the album.
Crazy.
So yeah, when we're never short of Beatles stuff.
No.
Before this, the biggest significant thing of Beatles footage or audio was probably before they started doing those new stereo mixes, was probably the Hollywood Bowl 8 days a week documentary.
Yeah.
Where they managed to clean up some awful sounding.
I was a bit disappointed with that. Because to me, that just seemed like a slightly... I mean, obviously, they just didn't have the footage, really.
Yeah.
So they could just they could slightly jazz up what was in Anthology. And like on the still images, they did some bits where they animate smoke, and there'd be like, if there was a candle in the background, it would flicker in the photo. And it was cool. It was nice.
Yeah.
But
I'd rather have it than not have it.
It was basically just a sort of well-made BBC 4 program.
Yeah.
Whereas this...
this is the next thing.
But before that, it was Anthology, and I think
between that, actually, what they did is they cleaned up Magical Mystery Tour, the footage.
Yeah,
the movies came out and they had Blu-ray transfers, and the music videos all got restored.
Very true. Very true. So they've looked after us, to be fair, haven't they?
So there is a good history with the Beatles of looking after what they've got and leveling up what they have.
Yeah.
Or trying to bring the Vault to the modern spec. So hopefully as more technology develops.
But all of this talking we're doing here is just us trying to put off that listless feeling. If you are watching the Beatles Get Back, jump in the comments. Let us know what we've got wrong. I feel we've thrown out a lot of hot takes in this, a lot of spurious claims.
We've been bold.
So come in, set us right. But there's a lot to take in. You can't expect us to remember this all. And my notes were flimsy at best. So we'll see you next time on the Beatles
Get Back.